It is July 5th, 1814. American forces under Major General Jacob Brown invade Canada for the last time for the War of 1812 on the Niagara frontier. He's going up against Phineas Riall and his forces of British regulars, militia, and Native Americans. Now, where there will meet, it will become a very hot contest, a battle, and the forces are quite evenly matched, numbers wise. And this will also be the first battle where both sides use Native American forces as allies. And I bring you here today to that battlefield, the Battle of Chippawa. Now, the War of 1812 up to this point has been a struggle for both sides. Each army has been invaded, or as has had to defend and invade each country. We have the forces over in the west, like Michigan area, and then we have the Lake Champlain region, and then the Niagara region. They are all essential key locations for the invasions of the War of 1812, and are the theaters. So where we're at here at Chippawa, as you can see, is Niagara, the Niagara frontier, or the Niagara Theater. American forces first invaded Queenston Heights, and then they were kicked back. They were also invading the Detroit area over where Tecumseh would be killed at the Battle of Tom's. And American forces invaded the Lake Champlain area, but were beat back by British forces. So there were a couple of victories here and there, but the overall feel was not so good for the Americans, and the Canadians and British felt the pressure as well. So to help with the war, they invaded and took some land, gained some ground. So Chippewa is pretty much like this entire battlefield, but unlike American battlefields, it looks as if there's no trail to walk, and everything's just within this vicinity where I am at. I mean, there's a trail. It's this here, and it laps its way that way. But that's about it. It's a beautiful looking field, and we have here the tree line. I was told that's where a lot of the skirmishers were fighting, and the natives were fighting, and the biggest part of the battle happened in this area that is kind of like walled in or fenced in. We have behind me the British flag, Canadian flag, and the American flag. It's weird seeing it on Canadian soil, but it's dedication. I want to show you this monument real quick. So it says, Battle of Chippawa, July 5th, 1814. In memory of all of those who fought on this ground, many of whom are buried nearby, and to commemorate the peace that has prevailed between Canada and the United States since that time. This monument was erected and dedicated by the Niagara Parks Commission, October 2001. Well, it's only been around for 25 years. So these are the soldiers of the left division who fought here. Major Jacob Hinman's battalion, 9th, 11th, 17th, 19th, 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 25th, and look, a Pennsylvania Volunteer Regiment. That's quite cool, considering Pennsylvania is right next to us in New Jersey. Then here we have dedicated to the memory of the warriors of the First Nations allied with Britain and of the First Nations allied with the United States who fought here on July 5th, 1814. All right. Dedicated to the memory of the soldiers of the Right Division, British Army in North America who fought here on 5th July, 1814. Wow, we have 19th Regiment Dragoons, Captain James McLaughlin's Company, 1st Battalion, 1st Royal Scots Regiment of Foot, 1st Battalion, 8th King's Regiment of Foot, 100th Prince Regent's County of Dublin Regiment of Foot, Troop of Provincial Royal Artillery Drivers, and the 2nd Lincoln Regiment, militia of Upper Canada from Niagara Peninsula, which at the Battle of Chippawa suffered the highest casualties lost by a Canadian militia unit in a single engagement during the War of 1812. That's a way to keep memory alive. It looks like at top there's some cannonballs. Interesting. Now, as I was saying, it's just this bit of field where the battle seems to have been not necessarily preserved, but um, barriered, I would say. That'd be the best word. Using natural elements and stuff, like this tall grass and all. That's what I believe it is. But we have here some plaques. And we all love plaques. So it's here, background to a battle. The Battle of Chippawa was fought on these fields on July 5th, 1814. It was the opening engagement of the Niagara Campaign of 1814, the bloodiest military operation of the War of 1812. The fighting started early in the morning when a British and Canadian and indigenous force under Major General Phineas Riall attacked an invading American army under Major General Jacob Brown. 2 days prior to the battle, the well-trained force of American troops crossed the Niagara River from Buffalo, New York, and quickly captured Fort Erie. The invaders pushed forward along the Niagara River the following day. When the Battle of Chippawa ended just a few hours after it began, more than 800 soldiers lay dead and wounded on the field. The British were forced to withdraw, and the Americans won that day. And here's a little map. And as you can tell, it's also in French because the Canada has a whole lot of uh, French history to it. So here we are with Fort Erie, and then we have Frenchman's Creek, and we have Buffalo, not too far from here. We have Cook's Mills, Fort Chippawa, Beaver Dams, Lundy's Lane, Fort Schlosser, Queenston, Fort George, Fort Niagara, and Niagara on the Lake. That's all the battles that happened in the Niagara area. let's go on to the next plaque. So coming up to this next plaque, it says opening strikes. Okay, so from here, we are here. Brown is right behind us over here in this vicinity. So says the Canadian militia and British allied indigenous warriors began sniping from the bushes on the north side of Street's Creek at dawn on 5th of July, 1814. By noon, American Major General Brown ordered his forces and allied troops to cross the creek and drive the scouting parties through the woods toward the Chippawa River. The tempo of fire in the woods eventually changed to disciplined volleys as the British regular light infantry joined the Canadian militia in battle. Upon reaching the edge of the woods near the Chippewa River, the American Army and its allies found themselves within a few yards of British forces and quickly withdrew. So they had flintlock muskets, and some of them were still from, the Revolutionary War, and I mean they were upgraded. There were some Harper's Ferry muskets and rifles here, and they use all these different means of battle to fight with, all these different weapons to fight. But the muskets were the smoothbore flintlocks, were standard weapons of both armies. I read somewhere that there was a Harper's Ferry rifle at this battle too. Harper's Ferry rifle actually became quite popular during this war. Then advanced to contact. Major General Phineas Rawle, the British commander, sent his own regular light infantry, local militia, and allied warriors to clear out the scattered American skirmishers in the woods while the remainder of his brigade marched south along the Niagara River. Major General Brown could see the dust kicked up by the British and ordered a brigade into action. The American brigade crossed Street's Creek under fire from the British guns as they were met by the brigade sent by Rawle. Making their way onto the farm lane leading into the area of cleared fields both armies called the plain, the Americans formed in line facing the oncoming British. So we had red coats and we had gray jackets. There's a lot to be said about the gray jacket because when they were fighting, the commanding officer, might have been Rawle, exclaimed, "Why, those are not militia, they're regulars," or something of the sort. But I have it in the book that I have today that will go over this battle, because clearly, books and battlefields, we have our books. So this lines up everything here for battle. We have Winfield Scott, who will go on and lead a campaign in Mexico. He was there at the Battle of Queenston Heights when Isaac Brock was killed. He led his forces, and he got captured, but he eventually would be let go. So he gets back to help fighting the Americans and is in charge of a brigade. And he has the 25th, 11th, 21st, 9th, and 22nd all here. And we had cannons all along here. So, and that is the Niagara River, which means the way this is set up, that this is going to be all on this vicinity right here, where their actions took place, and they went against Rawle's brigade, 8th, 1st, and 100th. So we're all facing what? This is north, yeah, because the sun's to my right. So we're facing north. So we're facing where Rawle's brigade would be coming in, and over there. And then we had the famous redcoats as well. So, to the next one. Battle on the Plain, which is where we are at. Militia, cannons, Usher's Farm. So we have all the divisions up here. And this is roughly, well, this is where everything did take place, where we are at. Just to get a little bit of understanding where we're at. So it says here, battle on the plain. The number of troops on both sides of the plain was nearly the same, with 6 British guns, 7 American guns, and approximately 1,400 regulars, 200 militia, and 300 warriors on each side. Confident in the abilities of his regulars, British Major General Riall advanced within 75 meters of the American line, and a vicious stand-up fire fight ensued. The U.S. infantry advanced to the left to fire into the flank of the British brigade and clear the woods of skirmishers, while U.S. artillery gunners fired across the front of the British line. And militia were civilian soldiers who answered the call to arms to defend their nation. They're not regulars. And there's been a lot of issues with American militia. That's why you see regulars here and a Pennsylvania volunteer regiment. And oh, we do have a New York militia here. Cool. During the War of 1812, a lot of militia members would not cross the river because they were sworn to protect their home, but not invade another country. So they refused, and not much could be done about it. So they stayed on the other side. We saw this mainly happen at Queenston Heights, but a lot of volunteer regiments they did come over, but militia, they stayed on the other side of the river in America. So it says here the final stages of the battle. So in the American camp, this is roughly, I would say, where they're at. And we have Brown and Ripley coming around here. They fight off. We have 25th, 11th, 21st, 9th, 22nd, and 2nd U.S. Light Dragoons against the 8th, 1st, 100th. And these are skirmishers, I believe. We have cannons on each side. The 19th Light Dragoons are over there. So, and that's again all right here. And so the Americans are coming this way in the battle, and they're coming all around here for that flanking maneuver. But it says here, final stages of battle. As the battle raged, more American artillery deployed to the middle of the plain. American Major General Brown led Ripley's brigade across Street's Creek to the west, but the deep creek and its thick undergrowth made it impossible for the brigade to join the fight on the plain. Okay. Meanwhile, with point-blank canister raking his line, the enemy's infantry standing their ground, and his line flanked, British Major General Riall ordered a withdrawal, and for the first time during the War of 1812, an American army had defeated an equal number of British regulars in open battle. And the U.S. Army reported 58 killed, 241 wounded, and 19 missing troops. The British listed 148 killed, 321 wounded, and 46 missing troops. The combined indigenous warrior casualties from both sides exceeded 100 killed and wounded. This was the first major engagement during the War of 1812 in which Haudenosaunee, Six Nation warriors, sorry if I butchered that, but Six Nation warriors fought one another, ultimately leading many to withdraw from the remainder of the conflict. The soldiers killed during the Battle of Chippawa were buried on the battlefield the next day. And we got our last plaque here. In the aftermath. So this is the American routes here. And eventually there'd be the siege of Fort Erie. And then they would retreat back, and that'll be the end of the campaign, because they'll come up here, fight at Lundy's Lane in a couple weeks, and they'll go in Fort George, and then Cook's Mills, Fort Erie, August and September, and then eventually they'll withdraw and come back into America via Buffalo. It says the aftermath. The days following the Battle of Chippawa, the victorious American troops advanced another 25 kilometers north to Fort George before heading back to Niagara Falls. They would come face to face with British forces once more on the 25th of July, 1814, at the Battle of Lundy's Lane. An additional 1,800 more troops were killed and wounded. Later, the Americans successfully defended Fort Erie in a 6-week siege, during which another 3,200 troops became casualties. After being reinforced, the U.S. Army advanced again to surround Chippawa. This attempt was checked by Canadian and British troops at the Battle of Cook's Mills on October 19, 1814. With winter soon arriving, the Americans blew up Fort Erie and went home on 5th of November, 1814. The Treaty of Ghent, which formally ended the War of 1812, was signed between Great Britain and the United States on December 24, 1814. Now, as I read there, the Treaty of Ghent also would not have been ratified and even brought to America until February. So there's still like a limbo, or I'd say like a grace period of when the news would officially reach America and Canada about the Treaty of Ghent being signed and then ratified, because it was automatically ratified. But here at Chippawa, yeah, there was some wild fighting here, crazy fighting. Lundy's Lane is going to be way more bloody. The famous John Burns, who we know in America in the Civil War, supposedly fought at Lundy's Lane, and he probably was here as well. And you might be thinking the numbers aren't that big, but for an army of that size during that time, that was a lot of casualties. We're used to seeing numbers of like Civil War and World War One in the millions and the hundreds of thousands, but the armies were usually regulated to those sizes. They did want to call for over 100,000 troops in total, maybe even 140,000 troops in total. President Madison did by the time of this last invasion. And he wanted to even have those numbers greater, I believe, for the 1815 year and the campaigns. So the numbers probably would have exceeded a little bit higher if the war continued. But this would be the last battle or last campaign to be fought in Canada against Americans and Canadians. So this whole campaign was riding on, or is riding on, victory, which any campaign is. So let's get to those books. Before we get to the books, I want to show you this other end of the battlefield. We're closer here towards where the trail ends, and we can see the battlefield from this perspective instead of up close. So we have the Niagara River all along there. That's literally close. Like you can see that car right there. That's mine, but that's literally the banks of the river. That's how close Niagara, Canada is from America. And then all the woods here, the creeks over here, and along here, or where the skirmishers were, all the main fighting happened here. So I have with me here A Guide to Battlefields and Historic Sites, The War of 1812 by John Grant and Ray Jones. And on page 79, it talks about Chippewa battlefield. With the defeat of Napoleon appearing imminent in 1814, American leaders were anxious to make one last attempt to invade Canada before large numbers of British troops could be transferred to North America. That's right, because once again, the British were also fighting Napoleon. So these forces are pretty much their backup, like especially the generals. But once they were done with Napoleon, the Americans knew that the British were just going to send over their starting lineups for fighting us. So it was essential to win. Once again, the Niagara region figured prominently in their plans. In early July, an invasion force of several thousand men under General Jacob Brown crossed the Niagara, captured Fort Erie, and then marched northward along the left bank of the river. On the morning of July 5th, General Phineas Rawle and a detachment On the morning of July 5th, General Phineas Rawle and a detachment of approximately 2,100 seasoned British troops attempted to block Brown's advance. Believing that he was still facing only a small part of the invading army, Rawle concluded that an immediate attack was his best option. Hoping to catch his opponents off guard, he sent his men pouring across Chippewa Creek into the flat fields just north of the American positions. The British moved forward in straight lines with the river on their left, a dense forest on their right, and the creek at their backs. Often in the past, British regulars had been able to cow the Americans with their gleaming bayonets and disciplined maneuvers, but not this time. Having benefited from many weeks of training under the direction of the capable Winfield Scott, Brown's men quickly formed orderly battle lines and engaged the British with musket and cannon. The Americans soon got the better of the artillery duel, and their musket fire also proved more accurate and deadly. The turning point of battle came when the left and right wings of the American line angled inward so that they could fire on the British flanks. Riall had thought that most of the U.S. infantry on the field that day would be composed of undisciplined militia. However, upon witnessing the breathtaking precision of the American maneuvers, he is said to have exclaimed, "Those are regulars, by God!" Seeing that his own redcoat regulars were taking a severe pounding, Riall ordered them to retreat back across the Chippewa Bridge. British casualties amounted to 400 killed and wounded, with 90 taken prisoner. The Americans lost about 300 men, with none taken prisoner. In the days following the Battle of Chippawa, Brown continued to outmaneuver Riall, forcing him to retreat all the way to Fort George. Brown had failed to corner and decisively defeat the British. Even so, the excellent performance of his troops at Chippawa had shown for the first time that the American forces could successfully engage British regulars in the open field. So, it says here also what you'll see today, which is uh, the Chippewa battlefield is a must-see destination for anyone interested in the War of 1812 or in early 19th century military tactics. Unlike so many other historic sites, this one remains in near pristine condition. That's good to know because I didn't know how much of this was actually preserved. So that's good to know. I'm glad I brought this to you. It appears little changed from that day 2 centuries ago, when destiny brought the determined armies of Brown and Riall together in these fields. There are no gift shops here or guides or antique military attire, and not much to see except for a modest memorial obelisk and the battlefield itself. But therein lies the magic of the place. Without all the well-meaning interpretive clutter, it is possible to gaze out over the woods and meadows and imagine the smoke and din of battle. A self-guided walking tour with a simple but informative descriptive markers provides a good sense of the give and take of the action. And just north of the battlefield, a plaque in Kingsbridge Park marks the site of Fort Chippawa. General Riall and his troops briefly took refuge here after losing the Battle of Chippawa. The park is located only 5 minutes from Niagara Falls, and the thunder of that mighty cataract is plainly audible. And there we have it with this book. We're going to go on to the next. So I have with me here The War of 1812, A Forgotten Conflict, Bicentennial Edition by Donald R. Hickey. Now, I don't have this on loan by Second Time Books, but this copy actually will be available in their collection for you to purchase once this series is over. And the link in the description below is to their website. You'll be able to buy it at that time. But for now, the link is in the description. But it says here on page 188 of the Battle of Chippawa, realizing that a major British force was headed his way, Brown ordered Scott to attack. The engagement that followed pitted some 2,000 Americans and Indians against an Anglo-Indian force of about equal strength, while an American artillery battery under Captain Nathan Townsend pounded the British. Scott coolly maneuvered his men under heavy enemy artillery fire to take up a position along a farm lane. Scott's men were outfitted in gray uniforms because of a shortage of blue cloth. Raw, who thought the uniforms signified militia, was stunned by the discipline he saw. "Why, these are regulars!" he reportedly exclaimed, thus contributing to an American legend. The British advanced within musket range of Scott's force, but Scott's long hours of training again paid off, and the Redcoats got the worst of several volleys. When the British right sagged in the face of American advance, Raw withdrew across the Chippewa and then took refuge in Fort George. In the Battle of Chippawa, the Americans lost 325 killed, wounded, and missing, and the British lost about 500. The engagement was an important benchmark for the U.S. Army because it marked the first time that an American force had defeated a British force of equal strength in an open battlefield. It also demonstrated the benefits of Scott's rigorous training methods. Scott later claimed that the cadets at West Point adopted gray uniforms to honor his brigade, but the cadets already wore gray because blue cloth was unavailable. Only later did the U.S. Military Academy embrace the notion that the color honored the American Army for its performance on the Niagara in 1814. Brown next moved his army across the Chippewa River. He hoped that Chauncey would bring heavy guns and additional troops from Sackett's Harbor, and that the two commanders could undertake joint operations against the British. But Chauncey was ill and, as usual, slow to commit his squadron into action. In addition, he resented Brown's intimation that the Navy was the Army's transport service. The Secretary of the Navy, he archly told Brown, has honored us with a higher density. We are intended to seek and to fight the enemy's fleet. And this is the great purpose of the government creating this fleet, and I shall not be diverted in my efforts to effectuate it by any sinister attempt to render us either subordinate or an appendage of the army. Even without naval support, Brown was determined to engage the enemy, although he could not lure the British out of Fort George. In the meantime, petty warfare erupted in the region, which both sides found exasperating. On July 12th, Brigadier General John Swift of the New York militia was mortally wounded by a British picket who the Americans thought had surrendered. A week later, Lieutenant and Colonel Isaac Stone marched a party of New York militia into the village of St. David's. Egged on by Canadian volunteers, Stone burned the village down to the ground. Brown was furious and sent Stone home, but the damage had been done, and the British had further justification for their depredations in the Chesapeake. And there we have that tale of the Battle of Chippewa from this book. Now there's a little monument right here that says Battle of Chippewa. Here on July 5th, 1814, an American army under Major General Jacob Brown launched the last major invasion of Canada during the War of 1812. The Americans defeated a British and Canadian force commanded by Major General Phineas Riall, consisting of regulars, militia, and Aboriginal warriors. During the engagement, about 200 men were killed and over 500 wounded. After 4 months of heavy fighting with major action at Lundy's Lane, Fort Erie, and Cook's Mills, the invaders were forced back into the United States. As it was said, there was a lot of friction between Chauncey and brown, but they more or less made up for it with what they were doing on the lakes and on the ground, because they would be jointly working together a lot, and it was quite successful for the most part. But what the problem was, in the beginning of the war, President Madison had all these generals in charge, and there were very few who actually was able to do their duty properly, they believed. So they went through a lot of like recycling or going through some generals to find who fit what perfectly. And we have William Henry Harrison out in the west. We have Jacob Brown here, and he's also doing the Lake Champlain region as well. We also had MacDonough at Plattsburgh, and then we have Chauncey as well. The British, they didn't have to deal with those issues as much when they were figuring out who needed to be where. It's just unfortunate that who they put in charge, some of them did get killed at the beginning stages of a battle or the campaign. For instance, Isaac Brock, he was over in the Detroit area, came back, he was killed at Queenston Heights. And then we had Downey, who was killed at Plattsburgh within minutes of fighting. No one here was killed majorly, but Riall was, he got defeated. But more would happen with that, especially after the siege. But it took a long time for the Americans to find out who they needed in place to run the armies, and they're just getting everything in order. Winfield Scott was another one of them. Winfield Scott was getting all the armies ready, and this is where he was getting a lot of his experience that he'll take with him to the Mexican-American War, and then later on be the advisor to President Lincoln during the Civil War of how to go about dealing with the southern states and the Confederacy. So, but the battle here was bloody, but it's not going to be the bloodiest battle in the war, at least here on the Niagara frontier. There's going to be one more battle that takes place, and that's at Lundy's Lane. And that's where, not too far from here. Funny enough, the whole Niagara region is very close together. Not even, it probably takes about 45 minutes to drive from each Great Lake. You got Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, where you have up by Fort George, that's Lake Ontario, and Fort Erie is Lake Erie. And along this road, it could take about 45 minutes to get to and from, and its max speed is like 30, 40 miles an hour. I can't tell because it's in kilometers. I think it's like 60 max. But here, brave soldiers fought, died, and did what they needed to in honor their country, honor themselves. It was my first one in a while to do a national, international battlefield. This is the second revolution, the second war of independence. That's what the Americans were fighting for. The British and the Canadians, they just wanted to be able to defend their land. And here at Chippawa, the first battle of this campaign, ended in an American victory, of course. And if you like this video and you enjoyed it, Please like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.